Welcome to Yellowstone Story. Every story holds a lesson, a twist, or a spark of inspiration. Here, we dive into gripping tales, some heartwarming, some shocking, but all unforgettable. So sit back, relax, and let's begin. I placed a plate of breakfast in front of him, but he didn't even touch it. He just took a sip of cold coffee, and then, defiantly, swept the food straight into the trash. I didn't expect this. He could be irritable, moody, but to throw away food like that, so demonstratively. Holding the empty plate in his hands, he shook it in front of my face, as if expecting an explanation. I tried not to let my emotions take over. It was his birthday today, and I didn't want to start the morning with an argument. But enduring such treatment was unbearable. His irritation only grew. It was no longer about breakfast. He had snapped because I had used his bank card, as if we weren't a family, but rather a calculated partnership where each person lived on their own means. He accused me of hoarding my inheritance while spending only his money. It angered me that he saw this as a problem. I hadn't bought anything unnecessary. I had simply taken care of the festive dinner. But for him, it was a matter of principle. He demanded that I return every penny. It wasn't about breakfast. The real issue ran much deeper. It was about the money I had inherited from my aunt. I had decided to use it as I saw fit, but Edward believed it wasn't my right, but rather our shared opportunity. An opportunity to fulfill his longtime dream, to buy a car. He didn't ask, he didn't suggest, he simply demanded. For weeks he hadn't missed a chance to turn mornings into a stream of complaints, but today he had gone further than ever. He didn't even apologize for the mess he had created, stepping over the scattered items as if they weren't there. He didn't care how difficult it was for me. The only thing that mattered to him was proving he was right. I had no intention of spending my inheritance on his desires. But he wasn't listening. He kept insisting that I owed it to him. If I had spent money from his card, I had to return every penny. But my savings? Those were meant for his car. He nervously adjusted his collar, glancing at himself in the mirror, as if rehearsing his right to dictate my decisions. I tried to explain I needed to pay for the cake, but my wallet was at work. But even that became another excuse for him to criticize me. He didn't care that I was trying to make the day special. All he saw was that I had used his money. Even the cake seemed too expensive to him. And he didn't miss the chance to accuse me of supposedly feeding my family at his expense. I reminded him that the celebration wasn't just for his relatives but also for our mutual friends. And if he was so adamant about keeping separate finances, maybe we should consider separating altogether. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but judging by his reaction, they struck him like a bolt from the blue. Edward froze for a moment, then grabbed his work briefcase and shot me a spiteful glare. There was no surprise in his eyes, only cold calculation. In his mind, everything instantly fell into place in a way that suited him. I had orchestrated this, taken the money, and now wanted to get rid of him. And of course, I had ruined his birthday. He threw a sarcastic "thanks for the lovely gift, dear" my way, and stormed out of the apartment without giving me a chance to respond. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table and let out a heavy sigh. There was no time to dwell on it. I was already late for work, but my mood was completely ruined. The thought of the evening made everything worse. The house would be full of guests, and he, seated at the head of the table, would be seething with resentment. But one thing was certain, he was not getting that car. My aunt had never liked him, and now I could see why. She had made it clear before she passed, everything she left me was meant to stay mine, and I knew she was right. Not a single doubt. His mother was the first guest to reach out. As always, it wasn't to ask how I was doing, but to check on dinner plans. I calmly told her that I had ordered food and that it would be delivered by 7. I didn't go into details, just lied that I was overwhelmed with work and didn't have time to cook. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Casually, as if it were just an afterthought, She asked what I was getting Edward for his birthday. I replied just as calmly that I had already bought him a new cologne, something he had mentioned wanting before. Her reaction was predictable, shock and disapproval. To her, it was far too simple a gift for a man turning 40. She proudly announced that she and Samantha had ordered him an engraved watch, clearly implying that I should have done the same. But I wasn't about to play along. A car was out of the question, and her remark about me not loving my husband enough only irritated me further. Since when was love measured by the price of a gift? There was no point in arguing with her. I nodded and said I would return the cologne and buy something more expensive. She seemed satisfied, but of course didn't stop there. Now she suggested I simply give him the money so he could choose his own gift. She always had a way of making people feel obligated, but not me. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. As soon as the call ended, I muttered under my breath, "Old schemer." I gathered my things and headed to work, though my mind was elsewhere. I stayed at the office for only a couple of hours, just for show, before asking to leave early, claiming I needed time to prepare for my husband's birthday. My boss didn't question it, so I left without hesitation and went straight to the store to return the cologne. On the way, a thought crossed my mind. I should stop by Edward's office. Despite everything, I didn't want us to sit through his birthday dinner in tense silence under the watchful eyes of the guests. I hoped to at least ease the atmosphere a little. However, when I arrived, he wasn't there. His phone was off. When I asked about his absence, the HR manager calmly explained that he had taken the day off for his birthday. It was allowed under the company's policy. I tensed. He had submitted the request 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't known about it. The HR manager looked at me with mild surprise. "You weren't aware?" I forced a smile and shrugged, hiding the unease creeping up my spine. "He mentioned something, but I have so much going on I must have forgotten," I replied, feeling like a complete fool. As I stepped out of the building, my first instinct was to call him. This time, he answered, his voice carrying a forced lightness. "What did you need?" he asked, as if nothing had happened. "I wanted to stop by your office and talk," I said, trying to pick up on any hint of hesitation. "Where are you?" His tone was even, but I sensed a flicker of tension. "I'm busy at the office. The boss isn't here, so I'm covering for everyone. Don't come by, we'll talk at home. I'll be there by 7 when the guests arrive." His response came quickly, rehearsed. I froze, gripping my phone tightly. He was lying. I had just been at his office. I knew he hadn't shown up all day. So, where was he really? A sinking feeling tightened in my chest. Maybe this wasn't just about money, the inheritance, or how I spent his salary. Maybe the problem ran much deeper. After all these years together, was I only now realizing that my husband could lie to my face without hesitation? The thought of his birthday celebration became unbearable. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to create a warm and pleasant evening for him, if everything between us was built on lies. I lingered near his office, trying to process it all, but my mind kept pushing me toward the one person who knew everything about our family. I needed to talk to them. I headed toward Olivia's office. It was nearby, and I knew she was always there. Olivia worked as a cosmetologist, raising her son alone after the man she had once been with never married her. She was the one person I thought I could trust with my deepest thoughts. She had always given solid advice, which is why I decided to go see her, to talk, to calm down. She was the one person I believed I could confide in, or at least, that's what I had thought. As I reached her office and raised my hand to knock, a tense conversation drifted through the thin door. I immediately recognized Edward's voice. He sounded irritated, almost shouting, discussing my money, how to squeeze it out of me. Olivia was angry, pushing back at him. She demanded that he spend his birthday with her, furious that I had refused to hand over my inheritance. I froze, feeling an icy chill spread through me. They were talking about me, but not as a person, as an obstacle, something that would eventually disappear. Edward reassured Olivia that everything would be settled soon, that I would be out of his life as soon as he got what he wanted. His voice was softer now, coaxing, promising her that she just needed to be patient. He would get rid of the native fool and make sure I bought him the car. My head spun from what I was hearing. At first I thought it was just about money, but then it hit me. Edward and Olivia had been together for a long time. This wasn't just an affair. He wasn't just cheating. He had a plan, a calculated scheme to leave me with nothing. I stood frozen at the door, listening as my life crumbled around me, frantically trying to figure out what to do next. But I didn't need to hear any more. It was all clear. There was no point in bursting in or making a scene. They had been scheming behind my back for too long. Instead, I turned and walked away. I went straight to the store. Without a second thought, I returned the cologne. And in its place, I chose a very different gift for Edward. The time until the evening flew by unnoticed. At home, I tried to gather my thoughts, but my nerves refused to settle. My hands trembled, but I knew I had to stay composed. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I intended to serve it at a full dinner table, right in front of his mother and sister. The couriers delivered the food on time. I carefully arranged the dishes, making sure everything was in place. Just as I finished, the door opened, and Edward walked in, beaming as if nothing had happened. He approached me with a cheerful smile, as if the morning's tension had completely vanished. His voice carried a hint of excitement, anticipation. "So, what was it you wanted to tell me?" I looked at him and felt a cold, simmering calm settle inside me. Soon he would find out exactly what kind of gift I'd prepared for him. "Nothing for now," I replied evenly, meeting his gaze. "Just wait until all the guests arrive." I've realized a lot after our conversation. I lived with my eyes closed, not seeing the obvious. And now, I want to give you a very important gift, but only in front of everyone. Edward's demeanor shifted instantly. His tone softened, almost conciliatory. He mumbled something about how he had overreacted in the morning, how he was just tired, how things weren't the way they should be. His complaints were familiar. The children had moved away. They didn't even call to wish him a happy birthday. I had changed, become too independent. There was no family anymore. Separate finances, wasn't that the first step toward divorce? He went on, insisting that, as a man, he knew what was best for us, that he was the one taking care of both of us. I just smirked. The kids had promised to visit over the weekend, and as for our family, there hadn't been one for a long time. Not because of money. It disappeared the moment he decided to betray me. At some point, he seemed to soften completely. He was no longer attacking, no longer demanding. His question sounded almost casual. "You don't have to pay me back for the cake. Did you at least get a good one?" "Honey cake. You'll love it," I replied with a slight smile. I could tell he noticed a shift in me, but he didn't understand it. As the guests arrived, he practically radiated anticipation. He was convinced he had won, that I had finally given in, that the gift I had prepared was exactly what he had been dreaming of. How wrong he was. Casually, as if it was just small talk, he mentioned that he had been looking at new car models. He had already decided which one he wanted, down to the color. All that was left was for me to pay for it. Without a shred of doubt, he stated his next logical step. The car should be registered under his mother's name. "As you wish, dear," I replied in an even tone. Edward seemed pleased. In his mind, everything had fallen neatly into place. Our morning argument had been necessary to make me understand the hint and submit to his wishes. The guests had already gathered. Among them were his mother, Linda, and his sister, Samantha, who had never hidden her dislike for me. As usual, she couldn't resist a jab, casually implying that I would have ruined the food if I had cooked it myself. But no one paid her any attention. All eyes were on the birthday boy. "Attention, everyone," Edward announced grandly. "My wife will be the first to congratulate me." I stood up from the table, taking my time. "I need to get the gift. It's in the kitchen," I said calmly. I walked away, opened the fridge, and took out the cake box. Placing it in front of him, I watched as he practically glowed with anticipation. I could almost see the image forming in his mind. The cake shaped like a car, a symbol of his long-awaited gift, proof that he had won. But when I lifted the lid, it revealed an ordinary round cake. A stunned silence filled the room. His mother craned her neck, squinting at the writing on top. She clearly didn't understand what was happening. Edward, on the other hand, turned red, his face flushed like a ripe tomato. His eyes darted between me and the guests, desperately trying to figure out how he was supposed to react. The cake was simple, round, with no hint of a car. But across its surface were words that shattered all of Edward's expectations. "To the most faithful husband, wishing you luck on your new path." He forced a strained smile, but his eyes betrayed his fury. He tried to laugh it off, muttering something about my strange sense of humor, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. The guests merely shrugged. It didn't matter to them what kind of gift I had prepared. They continued eating, chatting among themselves, while I stood up from the table, ignoring my husband completely. Heading to the entryway, I calmly picked up my handbag and put on my coat. Behind me, still red-faced, Edward followed, demanding explanations. I simply told him that I had taken a week off and was going to visit the kids. The plane ticket had been a complete coincidence. His panic grew. He struggled to decide what mattered more, his ruined celebration or the gift he had been so sure of receiving. As his questions turned into scattered, desperate attempts to regain control about the party, about who would clean up after the guests, he finally realized the truth. I was leaving, and there was nothing he could do about it. I threw out one final remark, that he could always call Olivia, since she had been so eager to spend this day with him. He froze, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for another excuse. But I wasn't going to listen anymore. The door shut behind me, and with it, the chapter of our life together. "Let Olivia buy you the car," I said without turning back. "Enjoy yourself." Edward shouted something after me, but I was already gone. It didn't matter anymore. The next day I was in another city, at my son's place, no luggage, just a small bag. I had come simply to talk. I told him everything that had happened the night before, and for the first time in a long while I felt truly heard. The house was filled with family, not the kind where I had to fight for my place and respect, but a real family. We discussed what to do next, and no one tried to convince me that I was making a mistake. Meanwhile, back in Edward's house, the evening hadn't gone as he had expected. He anxiously waited for the last guests to leave, playing his usual performance for them. He reluctantly explained my absence, saying I had left for urgent work matters. But those who actually cared only needed one look at him to realize it had nothing to do with work. Linda and Samantha didn't bother to hide their displeasure. His mother was loudly outraged, calling my gift ridiculous and insisting that all I had done was humiliate Edward in front of everyone. They didn't ask him any uncomfortable questions, didn't wonder why I had left. The only thing that mattered to them was that he no longer looked the way he wanted in front of others. Edward tried to keep his composure, convincing himself and those around him that I had just overreacted and would be back soon. But his mother and sister made no effort to hide their irritation. They refused to help, leaving him to deal with the mess on his own. With no other option, he called Olivia. Frustrated, he admitted that his plan had failed. I had found out everything. He tried to reassure her that it was temporary, that I just needed time to cool down, and that I would eventually fix everything myself. He was convinced that once I returned, I would hand over the money because, in his mind, the children were always on his side. But Olivia wasn't in a hurry to reinforce his confidence. She gave only a brief response, unwilling to get involved in his problems. When he suggested meeting, she declined, citing her responsibilities with her son. the next morning brought new blows. His eldest son called, wasting no time making it clear that the divorce was inevitable and that neither he nor his brother would stand in the way. Edward still tried to resist, demanding explanations, clinging to the hope that he could claim my inheritance. But he was met with a single, irrefutable truth. It wasn't his money, and he had no right to it. The ground beneath him was crumbling fast. He blamed Olivia, cursed the circumstances, but none of it mattered anymore. The divorce, the division of assets, it was no longer just a threat, but a reality he had no choice but to accept. And, on his birthday, this was the only gift he received.